A truth frozen inside a drink, chilling and final. Welcome to Wolfe Mysteries. I'm your host, and this sleuthing circle keeps growing. Q, tell me where you're tuning in from. Your voices breathe life into these tales. Let's dig in. When the doorbell rang at 10:30 in the morning, Nero Wolfe didn't flinch, twitch, or tilt his head. He was locked in a philosophical duel with a stubborn passage on bee behavior from a 1926 3-volume set. And short of the house catching fire or Fritz dropping a souffle, the outside world could wait. I, on the other hand, was in a less scholarly mood. My morning coffee was half drunk, my crossword half filled, and I'd been balancing a pencil on my nose when the buzzer chimed. As usual, I took that as the universe's cue to toss me into some light-filled work horror, a front row seat to human folly. I opened the door, expecting a desperate widow, a slick attorney, or an NYPD lieutenant with a favor-shaped grin. Instead, I got a man in a full tuxedo. Now, I don't shock easily, but a tux before noon on a Wednesday earns points for audacity. He was youngish, early 30s, with the kind of face you'd spot in a charity gala program next to titles like Vice, President of Acquisitions, or Heir to the Whatever Fortune. Pale, twitchy fingers clutched a leather portfolio to his chest like it might bolt. His tie was crooked, but his shoes gleamed like polished obsidian. "Mr. Goodwin?" Key asked, peering past me into the hallway as if Wolfe might sweep in wearing monogrammed robes. "You get points for formality, Key," I said, leaning on the doorframe. "If you're selling tuxedos door to door, you're 2 streets past lost. Otherwise, state your business." "My name is Preston Lang," he stammered, his eyes darting. "I need Mr. Wolfe's help. Well, it's not something I can explain in the hall." I eyed him, one eyebrow raised. "Let me guess, sits sensitive. Private and probably embarrassing enough that you skipped shaving and made friends with a whiskey bottle last Nita's ears went red. I've done nothing wrong, but something. Is off it concerns a close friend she's missing, or no, not exactly missing, but I held up a palm's low down. Wolf doesn't take missing persons unless they've gone missing in his herb room. I have reason to believe she left a message for me in a nice cube." There was a pause. Even I had to blink at that one, and I know how it sounds, but it's not a joke. He tightened his grip on folder. "She's a performance artist, extremely calculated. She'd know I'd look in her freezer. She used to joke about hiding secrets in ice because it preserved things and wait here." I said and shut the photo out in his face. I strolled back toward the office where Wolfe was still nested in his oversized chair, frowning like Darwin himself had just contradicted him. I told him in summary that there was a man in the front hall who believed someone had sent him a coded message by way of frozen water. Wolfe sighed, closed his book with deliberate gravity, and looked at me with the enthusiasm of a man told his orchids had voted for a different botanist. "I have no intention of involving myself in sentimental riddles," he said. "An ice cube is for chilling liquid, not intrigued." I shrugged it then. I'll send him on his way. But I didn't turn. Instead, I waited. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Hated when I loitered like that. It meant I knew something he didn't, or worse, that knew he wanted to know it and hadn't admitted it yet. I gave him another 5 seconds, then added, he said, "The woman who left the ice cube message is missing, but not in the usual sense. And get this, he brought a sample." Now Wolfe's eyebrows made a twitch, not a full arch, just the subtlest incline. "A sample of the ice, no, of the freezer tray, 1 cube, and a small thermos, still intact with something frozen in the center. That did it." Wolfe turned his head, which for him is like a marching band doing a backflip. "Bring him in," he said, "in the cube." If Nero Wolfe had a natural predator, it would be the unexpected visitor, especially the kind with trembling hands and an emotional backstory. And when that visitor brought something dripping, symbolic, and semi-frozen into the sanctity of our brownstone, he might as well have been a cat tracking mud across a Persian rug. Still, Wolfe had told me to bring him in, and I wasn't one to pass up the chinchilla. Witness Wolfe facing the combined evils of a client ambiguity and melted water on hardwood floors. I ushered Mr. Preston Lang into the office with a quick, "You're up," and followed close behind, leaving the door open just enough to hear if Fritz decided to start traddling pans in protest. Lang's tux had begun to wilt around the edges under the strain of whatever emotional thundercloud he'd been walking under. Handed him a linen napkin, one of Wolfe's, and gestured toward the red armchair. Wolfe hadn't moved, arms resting on Dakara's arm's fingers, tinted under his chin. He gave Lang the look he usually reserved for someone who had overwatered a rare orchid. Still, he nodded. "You may sit. Mr. Goodwin says you brought ice." Lang blinked at the formality, but recovered enough to place the thermos on Wolfe's desk with exaggerated care. "Yes, sir, inside. It hasn't melted completely," is a single cue from Gerda's freezer. "That is woman I mentioned, your friend," Wolfe said, the one who was not missing yet upset. "Yes, Gerda Lyon. We were close. She's eccentric, but brilliant, an artist." Wolfe cut his eyes toward me, then back to Lang. "Let us dispense with fog. What precisely is she?" Absent from Lang, opened the thermos lid and reached delicately with a pair of sugar tongs he'd evidently brought along, revealing a squat, glassy cube clouded with freezer haze. Okay, but still mostly intact. In its center was a small, dark shape. I was supposed to meet her Monday night at the Darlington Gallery for a new exhibit. Lang said she never evaded. Call her assistant hadn't seen her apartment locked, but the super let me in. I found the freezer drawer missing one cube. This one was on a tray separate. It looked intentional. I leaned closer to the cube. "What's inside?" That a bug. Lang's voice was low. "A beetle." "Yes, it's carved ivory, maybe bone." Gerda said she collected them, called them her memento totems. That's what she called them, she said. Each one represented someone in her life, a symbolic archive. Wolfe grunted. "So, encased a symbol of a symbol in ice, and left it in the freezer for you." Lang nodded. "We'd had a fight, a serious one, but she wouldn't just vanish, not during an opening week. She was ambitious. This isn't performance art. It's a breadcrumb, a clue I stole." Glance at Wolfe. His eyes were now on the cube. Not blinking, his lips formed a tight line. The kind he wore when his curiosity was wounded, just enough to make him pursue a matter against his better judgment. "And the carving?" I asked. "What does it mean?" Lang hesitated. "That one, the beetle, it represented me lovely." Wolfe said, "You believe that by freezing your totem she was communicating distress?" "I do," Lang said. "She once said that if someone tried to hurt her, she'd never leave a note. She'd leave an object, something that has to melt," she said, "so they'd know it was real." Wolfe puffed out a long breath through his nose, not quite a sigh, more a gesture of resignation. "Tough nonsense of the world." He flicked his fingers toward me. Archie retrieved pie tray from the kitchen. "Sure," I said, and as I left the room, Lang's voice followed. "There's more." Gerda had enemies. Well, not enemies, competitors, people she'd outmaneuvered. In the scene, this show, her new one, was called Body of Evidence. Of course it was. I headed to the kitchen. Fritz was slicing shallots with the air of a man prepared to defend his counter space to the death. "Is the ice tray present?" I asked Fritz. No dead word. The freezer, not looking up. I pulled it out. Full standard cubes, no apparent relics of human meaning embedded. I brought it back to the office and placed it next to Lang's sample. Wolfe sniffed. "Not identical. The one he brought is larger, custom mold, perhaps." Lang leaned forward. She had two trays, One novelty, one regular. She used the bacons for parties, liked the aesthetic, H.M. Wolfe said, and yet she used it for this angular act. Tell me this fight you had, was it about her? Art Lang looked down at these hands. In part, she'd accused me of sabotaging her gallery. Pitched 2 months ago. She was furious, said I'd spoken against her to the board. I hadn't, but she believed it's severed ties. She distanced herself, but this ice cube, it feels like Apu's offering, or warning. Wolfe turned to me. You will visit the apartment. Right now, immediately. Lang stirred. You'll help now? Wolfe said flatly. I will allow Mr. Goodwin to gather facts. I shall consider whether your friend is in peril, or whether you are merely a fool. Lang flushed, but said nothing. Wolfe continued. I require names of those you say might resent Miss Lyon. Lang nodded quickly and opened his portfolio, handing over a printed guest list from the gallery with scribbled notes and stars next to several names. Those are her totem's people, she'd said. Symbolic friends. Rivals, maybe both. Wolfe looked at the list, but didn't touch it. Mr. Goodwin, take the list. Visit the apartment interview. The neighbors inspect the freezer note. Any signs of entry disturbance or artful absurdity. And if I find a second beetle, I asked. Photograph it, do not touch it. Long stood. Thank you, really. I know how this must seem. It seems, Wolfe said, that your friend is either in danger or conducting a farce of regrettable taste. We shall see. Long nodded, clutched his mimose, and let himself out. Wolfe didn't speak for several seconds. Then, ice beetles vanish women in artistic drama. Foo, you're still taking it. I am permitting inquiry. He corrected nothing more as I reached for my coat. He added, take care. Artists are worse than criminals. They lie with purpose and they call it vision. If you want a crash course in modern performance art, could do worse than visit a midtown loft that smells faintly of turmeric, printer, ink, and ambition. Gerda Lyons, apartment top floor of a walk-up with pretensions toward grandeur, was the kind of place could only get with old money or new leverage, and judging by the framed reviews on her entryway wall, Gerda had at the door had a fancy new electronic lock, but Lang's key still worked and it's inside. It was clear no one had been living here for at least a few days. The place was neat, almost sterile too. Neat, considering her reputation for expressive chaos. Not a hairbrush out offless. Not a wine glass with lipstick. It felt curated, not lived in the freezer wine. I checked, contained nothing but 2 trays of ice and a single empty ramekin with the remnants of something that had once been red and sticky. The novelty tray matched the cube Lang had brought, but all the remaining cubes were normal. No beetles, no bones, no symbolic hints from the void. I did what Wolfe would call a respectable surface inspection. Not drawer rifling, no diary snatching, just notes, an open sketchbook near the desk, a half-burned candle on the sill, a faint perfume trace in the air that didn't match anything you'd find at Macy's, and a business card tucked into a minimalist silver tray on the credenza, Sienna Remecurator, Darlington Gallery. The name had a red underline that always makes me curious, so I made some calls. Totem number 1, Sienna. It's RomeCurator.com. As a bum, the Darlington Gallery was a few blocks over a sleek white box with aspirations toward avant-garde, and Sienna Rome had the kind of smiled at Coachella cocktail. She met me in the lobby, dark, hair tied in a surgical knot, and led me past a series of digital installations that looked like they had been made by someone deeply afraid of silence. Gerda is unpredictable, she said. Once we were seated, but she doesn't ghost launch week. She thrives on attention. It's disappearing. That's not her. You too. Wear close. Sienna shrugged professionally. We collaborated on her last 2 shows. She's volatile but compelling. This new one body of Evidence was her most ambitious. She'd curated artics, little objects, intimate ones, symbolic like beetles. That got a residibro, yes, it's hand-carved. She said they each had meaning people in her life tote. She called them, and you were one of them. She gave a tight, private smile. She gave me a B. Ivory said it represented loyalty and quiet venom. Nice sounds like a Hallmark card designed by Freud. She liked metaphors, especially dark ones. And when did you last see her? 4 days ago. She was nervous. Sitsamian was watching her. She didn't say who I thought she was just psyching herself up for the show. Did she seem scared? Not scared, just, calculating like she had something she wasn't reddito. Admit, that struck a note. Did she have enemies? Ms. Rome, she had critics and wannix who wouldn't leave her alone. Name. Sienna hesitated. Julian last name. She glanced away. He's a performance artist, known only as Cult. With a K, of course. He is E. Thanked her, jotted down the name, and called Stahl Panzer. On the walkout, if there was anyone in New York who could find a man named Colt, it was Saul Totem No. 2, Julian, a.k.a. Colt, the X, with exhibitionism. Colt lived in a converted warehouse in Bushwick, the Kindorf place that looked like it came with a personal fog machine. I had to pass 3 vape clouds and a guy painting a grocery receipt on the wall before. I found the right door, he answered, shirtless, hishest, painted with hieroglyphs, and he smelled like woods and smoke and defiantrichy. Goodwin, I said. Gerda Lyon's missing. She's not missing Colt. Sages, transforming, you've seen her, no? But absence is part of the medium. Shilway said. Silence was the final collaborator. Did she leave you anything in note, a carving, an interpretive? Dancy smiled like he'd heard that before. No note, but I did receive one of her beetles last week. Really? What kind? Stag beetle horns intact, beautiful piece. And what did it mean? He leaned against Theodore frame. She told me it meant resistance. She said I was always fighting her evolution for you to split one 2 months ago, professionally and otherwise, and you were okay with that. Pain is part of creation, he said, which didn't answer the question. Where were we? Monday night, I was performing Echoes in Static 3 Horatio installation. Blindfolded in a tank saw, later confirmed the gallery that didn't make Cult innocent, just busy. Totem 3 Dina March. The critic, if you've never had the pleasure of being insulted with elegant sigh, suggest having coffee with Dina March. She met me at a cafe uptown, dressed like Chast, fallen out of the New Yorker's fiction section Dina had reviewed. Goethe's shows some favorably, some with daggers. Goethe was talented, she said, but reckless. Her work was often more self-referential than she realized. You were friendly. She sent me adjunct, once a scarab onyx, said it represented obsidian judgment. That's pointed. I appreciated the honesty. Did she ever mention someone threatening here? No, but she believed everyone was a threat. That's how she stayed sharp. And where were you Monday night? Teaching a seminar at Columbia. Took down the details, cross-checking. It would take time. Totem number for Reggie Voss, the patron. Finally, there was Reggie Voss, the hedge fund turned art patron who'd finance it. Most of Goethe's recent work. He met me at his office, surrounded by abstract and vases, and the smell of too expensive cologne. Goethe was brilliant, he said, but fragile. She always believed someone was after her. I told her to get a lawyer, anyone specific she mentioned. He rubbed his chin. She was hung up on Lang, said he'd turned some investors against her. I didn't believe it. She'd ever talk about us in art to leave messages. She was a message. That was the point. And the Beatles. He laughed. Yeah, she gave me 1 bronze, said I was the scarab of finance, which means what exactly? No idea, but I paid 10 grand for it by the time I got back to the brownstone. My notes were a minor novel. Wolfe was at his desk, eyes closed, fingers steepled for suspect's eyesight, each with motive opportunity, and 1 beetle richer than before. He opened at him. Hi. None have seen her, not since Sunday. She gave them all symbols. He saddened, then vanished. Curious. What do you make of it? He didn't answer. Instead, he gestured toward the freezer tray I had brought earlier. He'd separated the novelty cubes. This one, Kay said, tapping it gently, contains a sliver of what appears to be lacquer, a flake, invisible until melted. What does that suggest? To you, something was painted, covered, then frozen or revealed when no longer hidden. Someone is playing with perception. Archie, symbol and substance, nodded. So what's the next step? Wolfe's eyes opened fully. We tightened this circle, and then we let it crack. If there's one thing I've learned working for Nero Wolfe, it's that truth rarely comes gift-wrapped. You get it in dribbles, offhand remarks, botched, least forgotten details. The trick is to catch the dribble before it soaks the rug. Wolfe's instructions were clear: revisit the suspect's push for inconsistencies, sniff for fresh bait, and maybe, just maybe, rattle a few cages. I wore Mike Leona's shoes and brought my finest smirk. It was time for the second round. Stop 1, Siena, Rome, a curator's comp. With a crack, the Darlington Gallery was prepping for the second night of Goethe. Lion's body of evidence, exhibit minus the body herself, Siena, Rome, greeted main heels. Sharp enough to commit a felony, and led me to her office, which smelled like bergamot. In restraint, I already told you what I know, she said, sitting with perfect posture. Then I'm sure you won't mind me asking again, I said, flipping open my notebook. Are you? Said Gerda, was anxious before she disappeared. Felt watched. Yes, and yet she didn't cancel the show. No security. No calls to the cops. She didn't believe in involving institutions. She said surveillance was part of her aesthetic. That's a mighty convenient philosophy for someone scared out of their shoes. She wasn't scared. Siena insisted she was focused, intense. She said she was preparing something that would make the exhibit unforgettable. She said, but that was no jest, that it would be subtle, like a whisper that echoes cryptic. What about the beetle she gave you? The bee, she left it on my desk in a black envelope a week ago. There was no note, any idea who else got one? Siena hesitated. Dina, probably. Julian, definitely. And I assume Reggie. But there were more carvings in her collection, where the rest in her personal archive, a locked trunk she kept at the gallery. Until 2 weeks ago. Where is it now? She shifted. She moved it to her apartment. I made a note, you know, if it's still there. She pursed her lips. She hadn't carried out the day before she vanished. Told me she was relocating a case of frozen beetles in missing archives. The brownstone was quiet, save for the faint creak of Nero Wolfe's chair as he leaned back, digesting my report like it was one of Fritz's less inspired soups. Gerda Lyon, the performance artist who vanished, had left a trail of cryptic breadcrumbs, a beetle frozen in an ice cube, a relocated archive of carved totems, and a cast of art world eccentrics who all seemed to be hiding something. Wolfe had sent me to poke the hornet's nest, and now we were waiting to see who'd sting. Stop 1, Siena, Rome. The gallery's Siena, Rome ran a gallery in Chelsea, all white walls and pretentious lighting. She greeted me with a smile as sharp as her bob, her nails tapping a glass desk. Archie, you're persistent, she said, like persistence was a disease. I asked about Gerda's archive, her collection of carved beetle totems, each one supposedly tied to a person or a secret. Siena claimed Gerda had relocated it, but wouldn't say where. Artists don't just move things, Archie. They relocate for resonance. Vague, like everything else in her world. Stop 2, Julian Colt. The performance artist found Julian at a Williamsburg cafe that served fermented oat lattes and overpriced ennui. He wore a poncho and stared into a bowl of black rice, like it had personally offended him. You again? He muttered. I asked about Gerda's beetles. Did she carve them herself? Buy them unfinished? How many? He shrugged. 15, 20, her little trophies. Each one carried weight. Did she say who they represented? Not all. It's kept some unnamed set, meaning ships. His own beetle had arrived last week, wrapped in linen, left in his mailbox. Closure, he called it, when I pressed about burning it in a ritual. He grinned. Poetic, right? Okay. I mentioned someone freezing a beetle to send a message. His eyes lit up. Incriminating, maybe. Pointing fingers or asking for help. But Gerda asking for help. Everything with her was an act, he said, then paused. Except, maybe this time. Stop 3. Dina March, the critic Dina's Upper West Side apartment, was a fortress of books, with furniture buried under more. She answered in a robe, peering over tortoiseshell glasses. Archie, how thorough. I asked about her beetle from Goethe. Misplaced, she said, too quickly. Funny everyone else remembered theirs vividly. Goethe's archive, ridiculous. Obsession with symbolism totems, layered meanings. Kant, did she mention being followed? Dina's mouth twisted. Kata claimed her dreams were recorded. Strangers mirrored her movements. Her freezer hummed in code. Paranoia or branding? You decide. Where was Dina Sunday night? Home, editing essays. Lone. No alibi, but she seemed flattered by my suspicion. ###. Stop for Reggie Voss. The money Reggie Voss, Midtown Art Financier, was on a treadmill desk, dictating emails and sipping carrot juice. I asked if he knew Goethe had moved her archive. His brow furrowed. No, she didn't tell me. Sienna said Goethe relocated it for protection. From who? Reggie looked nervous for himself. Goethe was paranoid, but sharp. If she moved it, she was scared someone would see what was in it. What was in it? Stories, consequences, enemies. I funded her, promoted her. She thought I was a threat. She never said. Pushed about his financials payments. To Gerda, Sienna, the gallery. His lips thinned. Only if you find contemporary art interesting. Back at the brownstone Wolfe listened to my report, his expression sour as steamed cabbage. We're circling something, he said. Violence isn't the only sabotage. In their world, betrayal is stolen attention. Did someone freeze the beetle on purpose? Goethe did, he said. A warning, okay? But to whom and why? His plan: bait the suspects. Call Sienna. Tell her the ice cube melted and revealed something urgent. Make it suggestive, he said. Then wait. Called Sienna at 6:45 p.m. Voice laced with just enough urgency. We melted the cube. Something was embedded. Just the beetle. Pause. What was it? She asked. Hard to say. Wolf's having it examined. He's animated. Another pause. It points to something, I said, letting it hang. She thanked me, voice tight, and hung up. ###. The blink at 8:52 p.m. The brownstone's silence broke. Fritz muttered in German, tiptoeing to the vestibule. A shadow lingered outside the gate, motionless, watching. I slipped out, but they were gonna blur, vanishing toward 9th Avenue. They hadn't come to confront us. They'd come to check what we knew. ###. Gerda's apartment, round 2 by 9 a.m. next morning. Wolfe sent me back to Gerda's apartment to find her totem archiver trunk of carved beetles. It's a superlet. Me in after some grumbling. The apartment looked untouched, but the hallway closet was ajar. Inside, a dust-free patch on the floor 3 by 2 feet, rectangular. The trunk was gone. No forced entry, so someone had a key, or Gerda moved it herself. A neighbor, Evelyn, a soft-spoken dentist, heard a struggle 2 nights ago. Shuffling, a clatter, wheels bumping downstairs around midnight. Saw a tall, lean man in a hat, maybe glasses, moving fast. Julian, Reggie, half of Soho fit that description. But why were they or anyone hauling Gerda's archive in the dead of night? The puzzle, the missing trunk, the frozen beetle, the mismatched stories, it all pointed to Gerda's archive being more than art. Each totem was a story. It's a secret, maybe a threat. Was Gerda leaving a warning, or was someone silencing her? Wolf's bait had stirred something, but the shadow at the gate told me we weren't just circling anymore. Someone was watching. In the archive, wherever it was held, the key. Asterisk, asterisk, what do you want to do next? Asterisk, asterisk, follow up with one of the suspects. Dig into the trunk's contents, or something else. Someone else had back at the brownstone a marked disturbance. I brought the update back too. Wolfe, he was mid-Wythrow, his lunchtime ritual, a mandarin with the pickled beets. Not my first choice, but very on-brand for someone who found most of humanity distasteful. In cloying one, I relayed the details: missing trunk, midnight removal, neighbor's glimpse. He set down his fork. That he said, "Istrospas, you mean literal or symbolic?" Both. Someone sought to erase a symbobia. It could speak, which means we are closer than they are comfortable with. He leaned back. In the cube, it's melted, the beetles intact. No inscription, but there's a thin thread of red lacquer. Nth. Center saw took a sample to get it analyzed. Wolfe nodded. The color of caution, of blood, of artifice. You think it's a warning? I think it's a signature. Raised an eyebrow from Goethe, or from someone who wants us to believe it is. No unexpected visit to 17 p.m. The doorbell rang just as I was considering a nap that would have solved exactly none of our problems, but felt morally necessary. I opened the door to find Dina March holding an envelope and looking like she hadn't slept in 2 days. I shouldn't be here, she said, brushing past me. Good to see you too. She entered the office, uninvited, holding the envelope like it might explode. Wolfe looked up. It's Miss March. I lied. She said about the beetle. I didn't misplace it. I returned it. To whom to? Scarewine. 5 days ago. I left it in her mailbox. Wolfe didn't speak. Waiting, he thought. She'd made a threat, Dina said, that the scare meant she was going to expose something I wrote about her in Nassie. I shelved, calling her work a fraud. Did she respond? No. But then Shetty sappered, and now you say there's a beetle in ice. Not anymore, Wolfe said. Now there's only motive. She looked ill. I didn't hurt her. No, Wolfe, said Butu. Feared she would hurt your reputation, and reputations are the only currency in your world. She set the envelope on Wolfe's desk. That's a copy of the essay, he thought. If something's happened to her, it might help. He nodded. We shall see, shelved quickly and quietly. Wolfe eyed the envelope like it might grow legs. Archie, I believe it is time for what for positioning. There's a certain rhythm to a Nero Wolfe case when it hits its stride. Clues stop trickling and start. Overlapping suspects double back on their own stories, and Wolfe, without moving a muscle, begins turning their lies into little origami birds, folding them down until only the core remains. That's where we were, and pressure was coming from all sides. The ice cube had melted, the trunk had vanished, and now we had Dina March, breaking character to confess a partial lie and hand us a self-incriminating essay Wolfe hadn't even asked for. It wasn't guilt, it was fear. The kind that suggests someone had come closer to danger than she intended. And Wolfe, he was silent all morning, which meant he was thinking. When Wolfe thinks and doesn't eat, twice before noon, the city should issue a weather advisory. At 11:43, he spoke call Saul. 3 minutes later, Saul Panza was en route. Saul arrives to calm before something breaks. Saul Panza, as usual, didn't bother with hellos. He slipped through the front door like a breeze, wearing a trench coat, and joined Wolfe and me in the office. Wolfe handed him the list and names of Gerda's inner circle. including the known tome recipients and the red lacquer sample we'd scraped from the melted cube. Want to know? Wolfe said 3 things. First, who moved? That trunk. Second, where Wright went. And third, whether any of these beetles have been bought, sold, or out to ride in the last month. Saul nodded. The lacquer red. High sheen, brittle, possible shellac. Applied after carving saws, slid it into a pouch. And if I find? Gerda Wolfe looked at him, informed me immediately, do not engage. If she is hiding, she must have reason. If she is detained, then someone else has reason. Saul laughed. We didn't hear from him again until much later, but what happened in the meantime turned the case on its side. The gallery break-in at 3:11 p.m. I got a call from Sienna Rome. Her voice was sharp and fast, like a blade cutting through wind. Mr. Goodwin. Someone broke into the Darlington Gallery. Anyone hurt? No, the security guard wasn't on duty, but the archive cabinet in the back, the one we use for artist materials, was forced open. Anything missing? Just one item, one of Gerda's carvings. My pulse ticked up. Which one? I don't know. We had 4 stored for future use. 3? Are there ones gone? You called the police? No, not yet. I thought of you first. Wolfe, when I told him, didn't raise an eyebrow, but his chin tightened slightly on the arm of his chair. What does that tell you? I asked. That someone fears the beetles more than they fear exposure. They are not art, they are leverage. I called Saul to update him, but he didn't pick up. That was unusual. Saul always picked up. Evening, a visit from Cotet, 7:05 p.m. The doorbell rang again. This time I answered with a hand already halfway to my sidearm. It was Colt. He looked rough, hair, wild eyes, his bloodshot shirt half unbuttoned, like he'd been in a rush or a fight. I need to talk to Wolfe, he said. Now, I'll let him. And under protest, and ushered Dean to the office. Wolfe gave him a slow, once-over yes. Something's wrong. I think it means using the beetles to blackmail people. Wolfe steepled his fingers on what bosses, okay? A message, anonymous, a photo of the beetle I burned, which I never told anyone existed, said silent secretaries, a cost. That was it. No threat, just that delivered. How to my inbox. No sender, just the image in the line. Wolfe didn't blink. Why would anyone threaten you? Mr. Colt's jaw clenched. Because I knew Gerda. Because I knew what she kept. And because we had history, romanticities. But it ended badly. She accused me of copying one of her installations. I deemed it. She threatened to go public. And did she know what I think she was planning? To the beetles, they weren't symbols. They were evidence. Wolfe leaned forward, of what Colt swallowed, of how she'd been used, betrayed. I think each carving represented not a person, but a crime, a secret, something someone did to her. That was a twist. Hadn't seen coming. In the ice, I asked. She said, it preserved what was fragile. So if she froze mine, maybe it was the most delicate, or the most taming. Wolfe waved a hand enough. Cleaver's Colt looked like he wanted to keep talking, but left without another word. Wolfe stared at the door long after it closed. Archie finds Saul, 8:25 p.m. Saul found something first. Saul finally returned the call. His voice was clipped. Found the trunk ware storage unit, rented under a fake name, but cross-G'd the delivery service energy. Boss signed for the move that got a curse out of me. He moved. It why I didn't know, but broke the lock inside. 6 beetles, all labeled hound names and dates. One of them, Preston Lang, February 6, Gare's boyfriend. Another Regi, boss, March 9th. One says Dina draft leak. I whistled. So they're not just totems. They're timestamps, not just that. Saul said. There's a notebook handwritten. Carter's full inventory of the archive details, motives. Get it here already, on my way. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe begins to circle. When Saul arrived, Wolfe read the notebook for 20 minutes. Without comment, Then he shut it slowly and said, "There it is. There, what is the motive for? What for taking her, for making her vanish, for making her silent? The Beatles' Sarant memories, their indictments, and someone knew it." "Correct, Wolfe. Stood. Yes, stood. I believe it is time," he said, "to bring them all together. Variant, Lane, Rome, March, Foss. Cult, all of them. For what? For their own relevance. One thing to see Nero Wolfe solve a mystery. It's another to watch him play. Suspects, like a piano that doesn't know it's about to be tuned when Wolfe moves from passive deduction to active oppositioning. Something in the brownstone shifts like gravity, deciding to tilt in his direction at 9 o'clock a.m. sharp. The invitations went out, not requests, invitations. In the Wolfian sense, which is to say, you are coming and you will on time, or I will find another way to make your life unpleasant. Archie Goodwin, delivery boy of Doomsday, Wasson to make the rounds personally. Wolfe didn't trust phones for these moments. Keyed, certainty, silence, and the psychology of a sealed envelope. Each note, read Mr. Miz's name, Mr. Nero. Wolfe requests your presence today at 4, Sand Sharp at his residence. 4. A matter consonant Gerta Lion. Your attendance is not only expected, it is imperative. Cordially, Nero Wolfe. Delivered without comment. Sienna. Ron barely blinked. Reggie Voss gave a tight nod. Dina March opened hers with the cautious fingers of a person touching a subpoena. Julian Colt laughed like it was a prank, but I watched his jaw clench after the 5th. Preston Lang was already on the verge of coming apart when found him in a coffee shop, twisting a napkin into shreds. "She's dead, isn't she?" asked eyes red. "I didn't say that you didn't have 2:58 p.m. The gathering begins. They arrived one by one. The brownstone's front room began to feel like a curated exhibit of anxiety. Wolfe had arranged their chairs just so, half circle, all facing him backstow. The bay window like an audience, only the play was guilt, and they were all in the cast. Wolfe didn't speak at first. That Wash's opening move silence. He let them fidget. Dina kept smoothing her skirt coat, tapped a finger against his chair arm. Sienna crossed her legs. Twice Regis sniffed, twice, and pulled out a handkerchief. Lane just stared at Theffler like it had answers. Then Wolfe raised his head, slow and heavy, like a courtroom curtain, rising. "Miss Lyon, Saad is not dead." Every eye turned to him, not conclusively, but she is absent to be designed hers or someone else's in your presence. Here suggest you each believe. One of those possibilities matters more than the other. "Why are we here?" Sienna asked. Voice clipped to clarify the nature of her absence. Wolfe said, "And the nature of your roles in ITH." Paused. "You each received a carving, a totem from Miss Lyon, symbolic." "Yes, but also chronological and critical." Reggie shifted. "They're just our tokens." "No," Wolfe said. "They are records of betrayal, offense, injustice. She carved vetter grievances, gave them as parting gifts." Dina raised her chin. "That's interpretation, is it?" Wolfe gestured to Saul, who had entered silently with the notebook in hand. "We found her archive, a trunk of carvings labeled with names, dates, and accusations that landed like a grenade." Reggie sat back hard. Colt stopped, tapping. Sienna's knuckles whitened on her purse. Strap. Wolfe pressed on Lang. "February 6th, you withheld funding for a joint residency and attributed the blame to her attitude." Dina. "March 12th. You leaked a private tech critic to a rival critic." Dina flushed. "I never published it, but you shared it." "I didn't think precisely. You didn't." Wolfe's voice remained calm. "Reggie Voss. March 9th. You claimed to have sponsored her Berlin project. In fact, you redirected her funds to a second artist and attempted to resign her exclusivity." Voss scowled. "That's business?" "No," Wolfe said. "That is theft of opportunity, of trust. And what cold side standing do you think one of us killed her over?" That Wolfe didn't blink. No, but I believe someone silenced her, removed the archive, froze the most dangerous piece lengths, and left it for us to find either as confession or distraction lengths. I snapped up. I didn't even know she'd carved one for me, but she did. Wolfe said, it was the only one preserved in Sienna. Broke in, voice low. So you think Lang did it? No, Wolfe said. I think Lang was meant to believe he did that open net floor to chaos. They began talking over each other, accusations, denials, furious fragments, off stories. Wolfe let it build, then raised a single hand. The room fell back to silence, like someone had cut the power. He turned to Saul. Mr. Panza. Saul stepped forward. I traced the storage rental to a shell company under Reggie Voss. He moved the trunk, paid in cash. All eyes turned to Voss. He didn't speak. Why? Wolfe asked. Voss exhaled. Slowly, she told me. The carvings were dangerous, that she'd been cataloging everyone's sins. She said, if anything happened to her, the archive would tell the story, so you moved it, Wolfe said. To protect her, yes, then why was one piece Lang's left behind? Why freeze it? No. Answer. Wolfe turned to Colt. You received a message, a threat. Colt nodded. A photo of my beat lie, burned it weeks ago, which suggests Wolfe said that someone else retrieved it from the archive before the move and is now using these pieces to manipulate. Usanathor paused. Then Wolfe delivered the dagger. Gerda Lion staged her disappearance. Everyone froze. She suspected one of you might retaliate. Soch laid a trail. She preserved one. Cube a message to Lang, perhaps to implicate him or to warn him. She seeded the others. She waited. And when the archive was to count, she vanished. Colt frowned then. Where is she? Wolfe didn't answer. Instead, turned to Sienna Rome. You were the last to see her. You helped her install the exhibit, and you have access to her apartment. She told you she'd moved the archive, but it was you arranged the transfer, and when she refused to remove the carving marked with your name, you removed her. Sienna's lips parted, but no words came. I never you'd been to the brownstone, Wolfe said 3 times in the last week, once as a visitor, twice unseen the night. The trunk was moved. Yo followed Goethe. You confronted her. She threatened exposure. She wasn't going to publish anything. Wolfe said she was going to perform it on opening night as the final act. Sienna stood. Dazzle Wolfe's voice was still. Then explained the lacquer on the carving. The same lacquerist in your exhibit materials. Explained the partial fingerprint. Saw lifted from the melted cube, matching your previous gallery permits. She sat again, slowly. Where? Wolfe asked. Sienna looked at Lang, then Dina, then Downches in a retreat. I didn't hurt her. She agreed, Togo. I asked her to disappear. Just for a while, until after the show. Wolfe's voice dropped to a you. Low rumble. You didn't ask. You coerced, and you feared what she'd say. She returned. Sienna's silence said everything else after the torments. Everyone had gone, and the silence returned to its rightful state. I poured Walter brandy. He didn't speak. For a long while, then he murmured, performance art. Greatest illusion is always the one no one applauds. I raised my glass, and the second greatest. He looked at me. The one no one realizes was real. It's not often. I feel sorry for a room full of suspects, but as I lined up the chairs in Nero Wolfe's office that afternoon facing his desk like pews in a courtroom, I had a flicker of sympathy. We're walking into a setup so precise it could have been scripted, but this wasn't a stage play. This was Wolfe's temple of logic, and when the suspects gather here, someone always leaves in shambles. At 3:45, they started to arrive. Sienna Rome came first, dressed like a minimalist sculpture.com, but tight around the eyes. Reggie Voss followed, brisk, loud, trying too hard to seem unbothered. Then Colt, who sauntered in like he'd composed the soundtrack for his entrance. Dina Marge trailed behind, clasping a leather foliato, her chest like it might deflect a bullet, and Presta Lang, twitchy rumpled last through the door, and clearly wondering why he hadn't already skipped town. I offered the standard, "Please, be seated." Took my post behind Wolf's chair, standing like a sentry Fritz had brewed. Wolf's tea, but he hadn't touched it. That was never a good sign. Wolf waited until the silence had weight. "Then you are all here, 'cause Miss Gerda lion-oranged." They looked around at each other. A few exchanged glances. Cold smirked. Sienna's chin lifted just slightly. "She is not missing," Wolf continued. "She is not dead. She is not, as Mr. Colt might phrase, it transforming. She is hiding." Reggie snorted. "From what?" "From consequence," Wolf said. "Or rather, from confrontation, but not entirely by choices that caught their attention." Wolf leaned forward. Just enough to shift the air in the room. Miss Lyon created her carvings note as tributes, but as testimony, her catalog of slights, betrayals, grievances, assigned to one of you. Her totem archive was a ledger. She told me they were symbolic. Kina said, her voice small. They were, Wolf agreed, and also very, very specific. Mr. Panza located the archive after it was moved from her apartment to a storage unit leased under an alias. That alias, we discovered, is linked to financial records belonging to you, Mr. Voss. Reggie stiffened. I was trying to protect her were. You, Wolf, murmured, or protect yourself. Your carving, labeled March 9th, detailed the redirection of funding from her Berlin project to another artist you attempted to silence here. Before that detail became public, I didn't, you did, but you weren't alone. Wolf turned slightly toward Dina. Your carving March 12th referenced the early draft of your critical essay. You shared it, thinking it harmless, but it was used, quoted by others, to damage her credibility. I didn't know. No, you didn't, but Miss Lyon did, and that's why she included it. Wolf turned to Colt and user February 27th. She accused you of plagiarizing the concept for her 2019 exhibit Echo. Cells, you responded by staging echoes in static a homage code. It Colt shrugged. Everything's an homage. She stole from me too, and yet Voff said you received your carving with no note, just silence. That jab hit its mark. Colt looked away. Preston Lang was shifting uncomfortably now, eyes darting. She left home, totem. Wolf said, not in the archive, not in the trunk, not among the ones Mr. Panza recovered to yours, Mr. Lang. Lang blinked. I didn't even. No, she made one for me. She froze it in a single cube, left it for you to find. But then why? Because you were the last person Shet rusted. Wolf said, or wanted to trust, but didn't. You stood by while her reputation was smeared. You said nothing. She viewed your silence as betrayal. Lang's voice cracked. I didn't know what was happening. Neither did we, Wolf said, until the break-in at the Darlington Keller rental. Someone removed a carving and tried to control the narrative. He turned to Sienna, and then we saw the Lacasiana's mask didn't crack, but her breathing changed, barely lacquered. Wolf said, of the same composition imprint used in your gallery installations, found inside the frozen cube, a detail invisible unless melted. Miss Lyon Wasmany. Things but careless was not one of them. Sienna's mouth opened. She trusted you, Wolf said, and you used that trust to convince her to retreat temporarily. You said, for the sake of the show, for her safety. I didn't threaten her. No, you warned her subtly. If she went forward with her final act, the planet performance, exposing each of you, her career would be over. You said. You'd pulled exhibit the sponsors, the gallery. Sienna's hands twitched. She panicked. Wolf continued. She agreed. She vanished, and you let the rest of us chase phantoms along. Silence. Finally, Sienna spoke. She asked me if the show was worth their risk. I said it wasn't. She said she needed to think. I gave her the number of her friend in Hudson Valley. She went willingly. Then why? Lie, he asked. Sienna swallowed. Because once she left, I realized I liked the silence. I liked to control. Wolfe gave a curt nod. You used her absence to bury the archivide. You weren't alone in that instinct. Mr. Voss moved it. Miss March lied above the carving. Mr. Colt received a threat and told no one. He looked at each of them. You all conspired, not with each other, but by omission, to silence a woman well knew too much. Lang's voice was so. What happens now? That, Wolfe said, depends. Postscript: a call from the mountains. 2 days later, a letter of typed, no return address, a Hudson Valley. Postmark, Archie. He was right. It needed time, but now I've had it. Sad. I think I'm ready to melt what I've been keeping frozen. Tell Wolfe, thank you for giving them a mirror they couldn't look away from. Wolfe read it, grunted, and returned to his chair. Will she return? I asked. She will, he said, when she knows the applause is no longer part of art, meaning she intended to shame them publicly. Now she will shame them by continuing living well. Mr. Goodwin is still the most potent revenge. That bronstone, when the dust settles after a case, doesn't return to peace so much as it remembers what peace felt like. The silence gets heavier, not lighter, not oppressive, exactly, more like a good coat. You forget you're wearing 3 days after his office. Gathering Life was back in its usual orbit. Wolfe was working its way through a new delivery of obscure botanical journals. Swab was organizing the last of the case notes, wondering which details were worth archiving and which were best left to memory. Fritz had roasted duck on the menu. The aroma filled the house with the kind of reassurance no post-mortem could match outside. It had started to rain light and cold, the kind that made a man appreciate warm rooms and clean slates. But the case wasn't quite over, not yet, because Gerda Lyon had sent one more thing. It arrived that morning. Courier. No return label, just a plain brown box, roughly the size of a shoebox. Inside a single ice tray, metal polished, industrial chic, and one last carved beetle resting in black velvet. Not frozen this time, not hidden, just present. Wolfe examined it as Fritz cleared the breakfast dishes. The carving was dark wood, ebony maybe, satin finished, and finely etched, smaller than the others. Tighter lines, more control. There was a name on a paper tag tied to Theleg with red thread. Nero Wolfe, March 20th. Congratulations. T. I said you'd be entotemized. Wolfe didn't smile, of course, but his eyes twitched at the corners. She included me in the archive, he murmured after it ended, while he picked up the beetle, briefly, delicately, then set it back down. She considers the case part of her story now, and me an agent of reckoning that makes you the epilogue fool, he muttered. I of her symbolism. But he didn't return the beetle. He placed it in the upper right drawer of his desk and closed it gently. That for Wolfe was practically a warm embrace. Justice without courtrooms. There were no arrests, no charges. Rome released a public statement that Gerda Lyon had chosen a private sabbatical, citing exhaustion and artistic burnout. The Darlington Gallery's exhibitor, another 2 weeks, and then shuddered quietly. Dina March's next column was delayed indefinitely. Rumor was she'd begun a memoir, anonymously, but with fine mystical tone. Reggie Voss diverted his funding to a safer artist, one well-qualified in marble and never named names. Colt staged a new installation in a Brooklyn basement. No audience, just a speaker on loop, repeating the words. You were never the message. It earned him 3 mentions and 1 grant, and Gertash resurfaced online a week later, anonymously at first under a pseudonym that only a few sharp-eyed critics connected to her style. The work was raw, less about metaphor, more about excavation. Truth without varnish. She'd melted the ice left. Told him stand, and she didn't ask anyone for applause. Wolfe reflects in his way. Dinner was quiet that evening. The duck was divine as expected, and Wolfe had finally relaxadento, a post-case rhythm meaning. He was less likely to bark when I cleared my throat too loud after dessert pear tart with walnut cream. I took my coffee into the office and waited. Wolfe followed slower, heavier, thoughtful. I set the cup beside his chair, so I said, "What's the verdict?" Wolfe didn't answer at first. Then he leaned back and closed his eyes. "This was not a murder," he said. "Not in the legal sense. A body, no blood, no chalk, outlines, but it was an act of violence. Psychological, symbolic, intentional." Cold, he sipped my coffee. "She froze evidence, left it like a message in a bottle." No, Wolfe corrected. "She left it like a trap, and the trap was not to catch guilt, buto. It's provoke it." I nodded, and it worked. He opened one eye. Not entirely. No one confessed. No one crumbled. But they changed, I said. He grunted. "Not every victory ends in sirens. Sometimes the punishment is knowing someone saw what you did and remembered." Wolfe didn't argue. He reached for the beetle again, turning at once in his hand. "She gave me this Hess, not as accusation, but acknowledgement of what that I do not see the world as she does. But I still saw her clearly. That one hit me harder than I expected. You going to keep it?" "I will not display it," he said, "but I will not discard it," which, coming from Wolfe, weighs highest honor short of naming an orchid after you. Final notes there. Are mysteries with fingerprints and forensics. Then there are mysteries like this delicate psychological stitch here together from silences and symbols. Wolfe once told me the trick wasn't solving what happened, it was understanding why people needed it to happen. Gerda Cleany did disappear to survive. Sienna needed her to vanish to stay in power. And the others, they needed someone to see them for what they've done and say nothing. But Wolfe said something quiet, laboriously, without leaving his chair, and it changed the course of more than one life. Epilogue, a quip and a comment. The fire was low. The brandy had been poured. Fritz had retreated to high sanctuary of sources. I turned to Wolfe. "Still think the ice cube was just water?" Closed his eyes. "Water preserves. Ice distorts. She chose well. So what was your carving supposed to mean anyway?" He didn't answer for a long time. Then perhaps she saw me as the beetle that doesn't crawl, just waits. I laugh it. That's a lot of symbolism for someone who hates it. Fine, but he didn't argue, and he didn't open the drawer. You'd think, after a week like that, with accusations lobbed like grenades, and the truth peeled back layer by icy layer, we'd earned a rest. But rest in the brownstone is a peculiar thing. Wolfe doesn't call it rest. He calls it return. Return to routine, to ritual, tough boundaries that keep chaos politely outside. And that's what we did. Return. But if you've worked for Nero Wolfe long enough, you learn something else. Some cases don't close, not because they lack resolution, but because the resolution lives. A mark, a cold spot, a contour where something used to sit. This was enough. Those Wolfe, of course, wouldn't say, so he declared the matter satisfactory and go back to arguing with botanical footnotes. But I've seen these scenes subtle as they are a longer stare out the window. A hesitation over his beer, the fact that he hasn't yet returned. Gerda Lyon's beetle to the drawer. It still sits on his desk, tucked under a linen cloth, as if even Wolfe acknowledges that not all symbols are puis. A visitor at the gate late that Thursday afternoon. The bell rang. A Gino appointment. No delivery, just a clear, polite chime that says someone believes they're meant to be here. I answered it, and there she was, Gerda Lyon, her hair shorter than nth gallery promo shots, a posture lighter, but her expression the same sharp intelligence that had been carved into every one of her symbolic bead lash. Wore no makeup, no performance costume, just a slate gray coat and a scarf wrapped too tightly for the weather. Is he in? She asked. He is, I said. Will he be pleased? Remains to be seen. I let her in without further commentary. Wolfe was in his chair, of course, reading a volume of Cicero's letters and looking like he'd rather be pruning bonsai with a butter knife. When he saw her, he set the book down and sadly, "Miss Lyon, I thought it was time." She replied, gestured to the red chair she sat. They didn't speak for 30 seconds, which in Wolfe time was a soliloquy. "You have read my letter, Sociade. I have, and you have nothing to say. Rarely state what a person already knows," Wolfe replied. She nodded. "Then I wouldn't apologize. You shouldn't. You did what you believed was necessary." "I did," said, "and they did to each of them, and you included me," he said, "in your archive." She smiled a beetle for the man who never moved, but moved everyone else. Wolfe's brow lifted a compliment. A reckoning hadn't answer. He reached for the cloth on his desk, pulled it back, and picked up small, polished beetle, turned it in his fingers. "You placed this last heaped." "Yes." "Why?" "Because you were the final act," she said. "Not of the show, but of the history. You told it, even if I couldn't." "And will you now?" he asked. "Tell it." "I already have," she said, "just not in one piece. A dozen new works under a new name. No more glories, no more grants, just truth fragmented. But real fragments are a dangerous wolf," said. "They are easy to deny." She stood. "So are symbols, but people remember them." Longer Wolfe inclined his head. She turned to leave, then paused. The aft door. "You didn't destroy it?" she said, nodding at the carving. "No," Wolfe said, "but I won't display it. I wouldn't have either." She left without a handshake, without another word, just a faint scent of cedar and citrus that lingered after the door closed. Wolfe looked at me. "Will you catalog this one, Archie?" I raised an eyebrow. "The case?" "No," he said. The Carvangi blinked. "Seriously photographed, did it? Transcribe the label, then return it to the drawer." I did as asked, and I knew what that meant. He was closing the file, yes, but also preserving it. Not for the police, not for some court, for memory, for truth, for what it was, theft, no clue that was never meant to be found, but demanded to bear. I remembered a conversation at midnight. That night, I poured Wolfe a brandy and myself a whiskey. He didn't comment on the indulgence, just accepted the glass and swirled it absently. "You knew from the start," I said, "didn't you, that she had destroyed part of it?" "Yes, Kay, and yet you took the case?" He sipped it back. "'Cause I wanted to know what frightened her. Even liars revealed their fear. Honestly, she wasn't lying," I said. "She was warning." "Yes," Wolfe said, "but the warning had to be deciphered. Otherwise, it becomes prophecy." We sat quietly for a few minutes, listening to the rain return outside. Then Wolfe added, "I detest metaphors, Archie, but this one had weight. Because of the ice." "Kay, no," he said, finishing his glass, "because I've had melted with it." And finally, my turn. "There are cases that make Headley Nestus. Won't be one of them. No arrests, no trial, no scandal. Just a woman who vanished and returned, changed, just a group of guilty parties who now carried their guilt in silence. Just a detective who never left his chair and yet moved through every shadow in me. I keep the notes. I know how these things play out. But this one didn't end with a killer hauled out in cuffs or a final scream echoing through the city. It ended with a carving, one small beetle, quiet-blished, dark as night. It ended the way truth often does, without applause.